Liberty podcast, where we are uncompromising in our principles and put liberty first, always.
Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of you for joining me this evening. Before we get into the show tonight, I do have a few little housekeeping items that I think you guys and gals might find to be fairly good news. So hopefully I'll be able to kind of get everything coordinated the way that I need to, and everything will just go according to plan. But before that, if you guys and gals would please, I would appreciate a like, subscribe, even share, comment, or whatever down below in the comments. It's always greatly appreciated. It's really hard to try and fight and really wean the way into the algorithm here. So trying to do the best I can. And hopefully in the next several months, we'll make a bigger comeback, draw a few more people in, and get those viewer and subscriber counts up a little bit more. So without further ado, a little bit of housekeeping here. So the first thing is next Saturday at the same time, I'm going to be having back on the show the great and awesome Tom Edlam. I'm very, very overjoyed to have who is one of my favorite economists back on the show to share some of his knowledge, his wisdom. Tom hasn't been on for a while. There's been a couple different reasons for that, but I digress. It'll be great to have him back on, and I cannot wait to get his opinions and for him to share some of his knowledge about things that are going on in the world, and to be able to provide some insights on where he thinks we might be going and so on. September 17th, which is actually a Thursday, at about, I think it's going to be 1700 Central. It's going to be 6 p.m. Eastern his time. I'm going to be having Scott Horton back on the show, which I'm super, super excited about. Scott always has great insights when it comes to foreign policy and a lot of the crazy chaos going on around the world, as well as some of the domestic things that we're seeing here. So it'll be great to have Scott back on the show. We're going to be talking about the Russo-Ukrainian war and a lot of the developments that have gone there, where we think it might be going, and a few other things. So hopefully you can tune into that. I will be posting some updates and reminders as we get closer and closer to the date of September 17th. And again, that time is going to be at 1700 or 5 p.m. Central and 1800 or 6 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned for that. I'm really excited to have Scott coming back on. And another thing, I just talked to my buddy Blake, who is the gunsmith and that I've had on the show before, talking about a few different issues, as it were, whether it's preparedness, whether it's things going on in the gun community, in the gun world, and all of that. I'll hopefully be able to have him back on sometime soon. He seemed like he was really enthusiastic about coming back on. So hopefully we can get him lined up as well. So hopefully we'll be able to have some really good guests on. And I'm still working on a few other things, but it's looking pretty good. And in a final point of housekeeping, I just wanted to point out that now that we're getting a little bit later into the summer and we're starting to push into the autumn and fall seasons, we are going to start going back to every Saturday in terms of the episodes. So hopefully I'll be able to have some more regularity in terms of content episodes and being able to provide more to you guys and gals as time goes on. So, all right, we're through the hard part here. Without further ado, what are we talking about? Well, we're going to talk about the conversation that I feel a lot of people have been talking about a fair bit. We will be getting to the gun thing probably next week, maybe even a little bit before Saturday next week. I might do an extra video, but I'm not sure. But the main theory, or the main theme, I should say, of this particular episode is for your safety. The realm of just dystopian overreach in this surveillance state, and ultimately the control that the state exerts upon the average person. And we're going to take a look at what that looks like. I've done a few videos on that, but I think, again, it never hurts to kind of bring this topic back up, especially when we're talking about things like flock, when we're talking about the Axon cameras and just a bunch of other intrusive things that the government is saying, well, we're doing it for your safety. You have the CEO of Flock coming out and saying, well, we're doing it for your safety. We want to make sure that it's a safer and brighter future. But that never ends well. And hopefully by the time I'm done, you will be able to have a better painted picture as to why that's the case. So in this episode, as I said, we're going to be discussing that. So let's jump into it. So here's the thing. And for those of you who are coming to this episode as the first episode, I do sometimes have notes on the right-hand side. So don't be distracted if I look too far off to the right every once in a while. So here's the thing is, in the end of the day, when it comes to control and consolidation of I guess the realm of living for the general populace, it never always presents itself as a mechanism of control. It never presents itself as a mechanism of consolidation of authority, of power, and being involved in everybody's daily lives. It's oftentimes presented as something that's relatively benign, and it's something that oftentimes is always said to be for your safety. We're doing it for your good. We're doing it for all of the right reasons. And we want to make sure that the future is, clean and safe and prosperous. And it's just this utopia or a dystopia of epic proportions that nobody has to worry about anything. We often see things like this attributed to, we're trying to eliminate crime. There's a war on crime. There's a war on drugs. There's, a war on terrorism. All of these different things have proliferated through millennia at this juncture. They're never going to go away. So the only real thing that you can potentially do is mitigate, but in their minds, they think they can eliminate it by asserting more control. Now, whether a crisis, and this is one of the things that they really bank on, that they really exploit, whether a crisis is real, exaggerated, deliberately provoked, or completely manufactured, authority uses fear to convince people that the surrendering liberty is necessary for survival. This is something that we've seen. Just give us a little bit more leeway here. Allow us to go in here. You don't really need, that much privacy. Or one of the best things that they like to say is, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then why do you care? If we have a camera here, or if we look through your phone, or if we look inside your home from your friggin' TV or whatever other apparatus it is that may have a camera attached to it or a listening device attached to it, whatever the case is, it's very nefarious. But again, it never starts off as the most extreme thing. It always ends up starting as this benign, it's a pathway to good, of good intentions, often leading to hell, essentially. This whole realm presents itself as a form of protection, compassion, responsibility, expertise, and the big thing is public order and the common good. They like to use and exploit these words in terms of making you feel better about the encroaching surveillance state, the ever-growing realm of control, or the mechanisms of control in which government uses to essentially police or herd the general populace into doing the things that they want. There's a recurring progression here, and it is to create or exploit a crisis, and the thing is not every crisis is manufactured. There are legitimate crises. There are legitimate catastrophes and tragedies, but like the old saying goes, you never let a good crisis go to waste. And this is something that they have mastered, I would say, in many, many ways, despite the fact that a lot of people have become somewhat wise to the way that they do things. They look to amplify and intensify fear, offer control as being the solution, marginalize dissent, normalize power, and enforce obedience. So you can kind of see where this is going. So here's the thing is, there's always this idea that as we get into this, you'll start to see this take shape. There's control that is it's disguised essentially as protection. When we look at history, governments and powerful institutions essentially have insisted that a safe, secure, cohesive society requires greater control over individuals' life. You don't have to necessarily have all of this freedom, but matter of fact, some people might say, well, having all of that freedom, having all of that liberty is actually more dangerous to you. And so we want to protect you from all of these different things, right? Hey, big shout out here real quick. Groundfog. So good to see you. It's a pleasure to actually have you right in a live stream. This is awesome. So thank you for showing up. It's always good to see you. And I normally catch you a little bit after you do the wave and a hello. So good to see you. We're told that the conversation must be monitored. We have to monitor your conversations. Purchases have to be tracked. Affiliations have to be recorded. God forbid you affiliate with somebody. Interests are to be scrutinized, and private behavior needs to be analyzed. You can't do this thing. You can do this thing. And why are you talking to these people? It's a never-ending chain of events, seemingly. We are told that firearms, in particular, and if you haven't been paying attention, there was a pretty good thing that happened as it pertains to the NFA. Again, I'm going to try and cover that a little bit more next week, but I just figured I'd point that out. A lot of good things happening when it comes to the 2A. We're told that firearms, speech, health, property, employment, markets, media, travel, and association, well, they must all be regulated. And why is that? Well, you simply can't trust, and that's really what it comes down to. We can't trust you with your own liberty. We can't trust you with your own freedom because we think you might, you might damage yourselves. You might hurt yourselves. You might hurt other people. So, just on the principle of we think that you might do these things, or we can't trust that you can do these things, we have to control and regulate these things a lot more, despite the fact that that is contradictory to the very notion of liberty, rights, and the idea of a truly free and prosperous society. Rarely, however, is this presented honestly as an expansion of authority, right? They're never going to, like I said, it always turns out to be some form of like benign mechanism. We have to help you, so you can help yourselves through this whole thing, and so that you're safe and that you're protected. And really, the government is the arbiter of a successful life, right? Instead, however, it comes wrapped in reassuring messages. I mean, this is where you get definitely a propaganda aspect. We know what's best, right? How many times did they say that during COVID? We know what's best. We know what is right for you. If you don't listen to us, then, there's going to be some problems. And again, not just with COVID, but with so many other things, whether it's war, whether it's certain financial institutions, it could be a plethora of different things. The experts have spoken, so therefore it is the decree, it is the determination that because the experts have spoken, they cannot be questioned, and you must fall in line. And if you don't, there's ramifications. And they always do these things under the guise of it being temporary. It's not going to take that long. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Most recent thing. Well, we saw that go into several years, and we saw how that turned out. There's a lot of different statistics there, but I will say that it was not good for the general populace. And another banger is this is for the common good. It is for your safety. They always like to box it up, and they always like to produce it in these things that are, benignly coercive. They try to gaslight you into these to this realm of thinking of, maybe they're right. Maybe these experts, maybe the government, maybe they have it right. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am the problem. That's what they want you to think. It's all the time that you're the problem. You are a problem to be solved. That's how they look at you. But the reality of it is sometimes there is a real threat, and with a real threat, we see things exaggerated. We also see that things are deliberately prolonged. Sometimes an event is manipulated in order to create the appearance of a greater danger. And sometimes the crisis itself, the very essence of the crisis itself, is manufactured to produce public demand for powers that would otherwise be flat out rejected. Fear becomes the opening. Safety becomes the justification. Compliance becomes the expectation. And control becomes the ultimate result. Now let's let's move into this realm here briefly. Pardon me. The manufactured form of crisis. And I think this is very important. It's one that a lot of people talk about, but I think we have to cover it because it's very important. The manufactured crisis does not always mean that every element of a crisis is necessarily false or fabricated or, not real. Quite honestly, one of the best ways of manufacturing a crisis is by using a lot of real elements, by exploiting a real event or something that is very real. Often, they contain real facts. There's a lot of real things that are going on. And I think because of this, there's a saying that some of the best lies are the ones that are often have enough truth laced into them that it can be hard to deny. It can be hard to dissuade. It can be hard to even argue against it because this is true, and quite frankly, it's a pretty effective tool and method of being able to utilize a crisis to get the outcome that you desire. There may be an actual genuine problem, legitimate suffering, an actual crime, real foreign threat, or genuine public concern. These are all very real things. The manipulation, however, oftentimes occurs through a variety of different things that I think none of us are strangers to. I would like to think that pretty much everybody who stops by and evaluates these episodes and watches this channel, you guys are pretty smart, and you oftentimes have your thinking caps on. And so you've probably noticed the same patterns I'm about to talk about, which is selective reporting, withheld context, exaggerated projections, misleading statistics, emotional repetition, suppression of alternative explanations, deliberately provocative government actions, refusal to pursue peaceful or decentralized solutions, and finally, policies that worsen the problem than justify more intervention. We've seen this pattern laid out ad nauseum at this point in a variety of certain circumstances and a variety of certain issues, and especially as it pertains to a variety of different crises. It seems very textbook. It's by the book for these people. It's a knee-jerk reaction. This is the way that they go about it, right? The authority may not create essentially the original spark in every occasion, but it can pour fuel on the fire. I would argue that at the time, when we looked at stuff like COVID, when we looked at things like George Floyd and the protests that occurred there, and many, many other instances, we often see that there's this inflaming of tensions. And then as soon as things get bad enough, then you see the government that comes in and they say, hey, we have the solution. Even though we created the problem, or we poured gasoline or diesel on this problem, we are going to bring forth the solution. Everything's going to be fine. Trust us. It's for your safety. It may contribute to instability and then present itself as the source of stability, as I just said. Again, this is textbook. You can look at things even like Katrina. Look at all of the arbitrary things that occurred during Katrina. And that was a long time ago. But you look at the way that they utilized that crisis, and there's a lot of shady things. And then you go forward. I think it was 2015 when we had those the outbreaks of those hurricanes as well. And you look at some of the things. I mean, you had services. I believe it was FEMA that was on the ground down by Louisiana. And they were dumping aid that people were sending down to Louisiana, Texas, and the affected areas. They were dumping them in dumpsters because it wasn't from them, right? So they had to be the ones saving the day. The average person could not help their fellow man. Otherwise, it would tear apart the whole narrative that you need government. It may create economic distortions and then demand greater economic control. Boy, if that isn't one for the times. It may provoke foreign hostility and then invoke the hostility to expand military and surveillance powers. Oh, man. I mean, if this is not just nailing it on the head right now in terms of all of these systematic, lines of events that are occurring, I mean, there is a clear pattern here through history. It doesn't take somebody to have to be a scholar. It doesn't take somebody to have to be a genius to be able to pick out these patterns and be like, hey, wait a minute. I've seen this show, but I've seen this episode before, right? It may neglect law enforcement, border enforcement, infrastructure, public order, and then use the resulting disorder to justify extraordinary measures. I mean, this is something we also see when we look at things like immigration, when we look at things like people pouring across borders, not just in the United States, but when you look at things like recently in Quetta and many other places, and then you look at the reactions of these governments and how they go about those reactions. I mean, man, it's really hard to say. In one hand, you have countries that just allow their citizens to be essentially subjected to whatever horrors may be brought down upon them. But then at the same time, you also have places like Poland that absolutely stamp that out, and they have no time for it, really. Hey, Gene, just wanted to say, hey, appreciate you. Thanks for stopping in. It may censor criticism. This is another banger, right? May censor criticism of a failed policy, then claim that declining public trust itself is a threat. Boy, yikes. I mean, that Iran thing is going pretty well. The stockpile thing is going pretty well. Matter of fact, pretty sure Trump made a comment about the stockpiles, about the quote unquote, the leakers, and how they ought to be prosecuted, even though that a lot of that information was fairly available. Man, I'm not sure how that one's going to work out for you there, Trumpy boy. But I'm here to tell you that's probably not the best way to try and win the midterms, much less repair your image. But I digress. I mean, whatever's clever, I probably wouldn't do it, though. There is a central pattern here that I think we can kind of deduce from all of these different things, that governments contribute or to or fails to resolve a problem. This is something that we see all the time. And, sometimes, there are things that aren't properly addressed, and sometimes you just don't have it all. And you just, at that point, try to mitigate as much as you can. The consequences grow from that failure or contribution to the chaos. The public becomes afraid or angry or disgruntled or dissenting, if you will. Officials insist that ordinary restraints are preventing action. So, we'd really like to get involved, but man, this pesky Constitution, the pesky liberty and rights of our people, man, we can't do it. But hey, if you just give us some temporary leniency, then we can really whip this thing up and get it wrapped up. More centralized power is presented as the only solution. That's the only solution. It's the only way that we can resolve these issues. We just need more power, but it's temporary. We just need you to sacrifice some things, but it's temporary. The original failure is used to justify giving greater authority to those responsible. So you're essentially rewarding the government for being terrible. That's not a strategy of longevity. It's a strategy of self-destruction. And you're talking about self-destruction of people that, of an apparatus that obviously has no interest in serving the American people. That's become abundantly clear. But there is an important distinction here that not every emergency is a manufactured thing. There are legitimate things. When we look at things like natural events, like wildfires and so many other things, it's not, like when you have a natural disaster, you do have a tragic event that occurs. It's not all manufactured. And I think that's important to understand, because when we start to just bleed everything together and that it's a manufactured crisis, then we start to lose sight of our ability to actually discern what is actually going on, how to decipher information, and to be able to find the truth of what's taking place. So, but every emergency should be examined for a few things here, right? Who created the conditions? Who benefits from the reaction? What information is being withheld? And, what proposed powers are unrelated to the actual threat? Are they trying to just shoehorn in these certain things? whether officials are actually solving the crisis or whether they're preserving it. And essentially, a crisis does not have to be invented from nothing. It doesn't have to be something that they just decide is a really good idea at the time. It only has to be manipulated enough that fear becomes more powerful, right, than judgment. So, there I go. I'll start destroying my own setup here. Doggone it. So, taking an examination of this, I want to look at the whole idea of a small and like a temporary thing. You know, it begins with something described that's temporary, limited, voluntary, narrowly, targeted, subject to oversight, applicable during emergencies, and so on. The public is assured essentially that ordinary people have nothing to fear. It's always you don't have to worry. The government's here to help. You know, despite what you might think. I believe it was Reagan who talked about it. Despite what you might think about the guy, he was kind of right about this. Where, man, the last thing you want to hear is "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I believe that was Reagan. Comment section. I know if I get it wrong, you're probably gonna ratio me, and that's all right. I will stand corrected appropriately. But in the end of the day, the public is assured that, like I said, ordinary people have nothing to fear. Only the criminals will ever be monitored. Only the extremists will be censored, right? Only dangerous weapons will be restricted, suspicious transactions examined, only false information will be removed. But the categories expand. You know, what does dangerous become? Dangerous becomes broader. Extremist becomes more political. Suspicious becomes ordinary. So, it's, they had a snitch line during COVID. I think that's something that was crazy. You have temporary that becomes renewable, and you have emergency that becomes a permanent thing. It's a permanent structure. And the first measure is important because it establishes the principle that government has the authority over part of our lives. One principle that is accepted, or once the principle is accepted, the argument changes. Okay, it changes the whole dynamic of things because now it opens this door to further infringement, further consolidation, further manipulation, and being able to twist the facts and be able to twist things to be able to get the desired result that they want. The public is no longer at that point debating whether or not power should exist. It merely is debating how far it should extend, which creates a very dangerous thing. We see institutional permanence in emergency surveillance, temporary databases, wartime agencies, health emergencies, crisis spending produces permanent programs, right? Temporary censorship arrangements have become regular information management. These are all apparatuses and mechanisms in which to control the daily lives and to be able to accrue more and more power as time goes on. Temporary power has a remarkable ability to survive the emergency that supposedly justified its existence. And so when we look at this and we look at all of these things, they are predicated and they're built on, right? A few things: fear, propaganda, and manufactured consent. Authority prefers voluntary compliance because it is quieter. Just do this and you'll be fine. Just do this. Just let us, we just need to do some checks. We've got to have checkpoints, or we need to see your papers. We need to make sure you're safe, right? It's cheaper and more stable than coercion. The objective is not initially to force people into obedience. Of course not. That'd be bad optics, bad propaganda. You wouldn't be doing it right. It's to persuade them, however, that obedience is a moral thing. This is accomplished, and here's the real thing, through repeated slogans, carefully selected experts, emotional imagery, selective statistics, government messaging, sympathetic media coverage, corporate campaigns, educational institutions, social media amplification, and celebrity and cultural pressure. We see all these things. We saw them very prominently, again, during COVID. We've seen this through war. We've seen this through a litany of other different things through our lifetimes. And the pattern typically remains the same without very much change. The same message is repeated until it appears to represent universal agreement, right? So it ultimately becomes a gaslighting effort to really persuade you and get you to fall in line. The average person who complies is portrayed to look pretty good, right? They're responsible, they're informed, they're compassionate, reasonable, even patriotic. That's what they like to make people who comply look like, and they are they're the poster child for what a patriot is, right? That's how they like to represent people who fall in line and don't question anything. However, the person that questions the policy is selfish. You're selfish. You're ignorant. You're reckless. How could you? Grandma's going to die. How dare you let those guns out on the road or out on the streets? Don't you realize the damage they're going to do? Oh, you're just paranoid. The government would never do that. You're hateful. How could you criticize another country? How could you criticize these people? How can you have an opinion that's contradictory to whatever it is that we say? And you're dangerous. You are a dangerous human being. How dare you question the narrative in the policy? The political argument is transformed into a moral test. People begin supporting policies not because they have independently evaluated them, but because opposition carries social consequences. We see this type of thing as it pertains to political parties. We see that there is a social consequence with whom you vote for, whom you align yourself with. It comes down to basic ideals and principles and all of these other things. They become a test, and they become a social microcosm that has consequences. And why does it work? Why is it something that is so influential? Why is it something that seemingly has a pattern of at least success? We can't say that it doesn't have success. It clearly does. And I think a lot of that is because, again, as with parties and many other things, people fear social isolation. They're afraid of being cut out from the group. They're afraid of losing their jobs. They're, from employment, friendships, professional standing, family relationships, access to institutions, and public reputation. And I hate to say it, but a lot of these things are damaging to people. We have seen what the effects are. We certainly saw this as it pertains to hot button events in terms of things like racial issues, in terms of things like LGBT issues, COVID, war. If you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, we see the fabric of this isolation and this social cutting out of people from each other's lives as being extremely ruinous, and it is effective. That fear is a driver for being able to implement a lot of these different things that the government wants to do, and they know that this is a very, very potent and useful mechanism in order to manipulate a person into doing the things they want. The propaganda campaign does not need to convince everybody. You don't need an entire convincing of the whole population. It only needs to make dissent feel costly and lonely. And I hate to say it, but in many ways, having a dissenting opinion does cost people. It does have real world effects. It does affect people in a real way. And, we'll get into that as we move forward here. The most effective control is not imposed by a population or on a population that knows it's being controlled. It's demanded by a population convinced that that control is a form of protection. I think we have to look, when we're moving forward here, we have to look at experts and the rule and regulation of the whole person. Expertise certainly matters. There are people that are very well accredited in their fields, and there are people that we do need in society. We do need people that are the leading cutting edge of their fields, respectively. Knowledge, training, and experience should inform public debate. But expertise becomes dangerous when it's used to remove questions from public debate entirely. When you use the realm of experts like Dr. Anthony Fauci, I hate even calling the guy a doctor. When you utilize what he says, and many other people like him during COVID, It was used to nullify and to label people, dissenters, into a sense of public isolation, to be ostracized from their communities, in many cases fired from their jobs or forced out of their jobs, and many other things. It's very potent. The experts say becomes many of the following. The experts have decided disagreement is ignorance, questioning is dangerous, and compliance is mandatory. Experts can explain risks, but they cannot determine the moral value of liberty, right? A public health expert may discuss disease, but cannot independently decide how much bodily autonomy a population must surrender. You have the ability to make that decision. Whether you wear a mask, whether you don't wear a mask, whether you take a vaccination, whether you don't take a vaccination. They can provide information to help inform your decisions, but they cannot be used to do that. But yet, in saying that, the government very much does use them as a cudgel. A security expert may assess threats, right? It may assess threats, but cannot determine how much privacy citizens are permitted to retain. An economist may describe market conditions, but cannot claim ownership over another person's labor or property. Technical knowledge does not need to create political sovereignty over the individual. But here's the thing is, when we look at how safety is produced, at least in the explanation of experts, it can expand itself into total regulation. Whether we're talking about, it involves nearly every human activity, involves risks, right? Firearms, speech, work, travel, food, medicine, property, commerce, technology, association, and private communication. If eliminating risk becomes always the government's responsibility, nearly every area of life becomes subject to control. So essentially, you're handing over your ability to even live your life. It nullifies the very point of liberty and the very idea of, self-determination and freedom. The citizen begins by the administrative permission of permission to work, permission to build, permission to carry, permission to travel, to trade, assemble, and to speak, and amongst many, many others that are not listed here. Rights become privileges administered by institutions, which is contrary to the foundation of our country, the United States. A free society listens to experts. We have the ability to listen to experts and hear what they have to say. An authoritarian society, however, or one that is a dystopia or despotic, commands obedience in their name. The promise of total safety creates justification for total authority. And from this, we move into another area that I think is very much going to hopefully feed and build out this picture. Controlling information and isolating the dissenter. Speech overall becomes a central target because whoever controls the ability to speech, language that can shape what public is permitted to consider, obviously has a great amount of control over the mechanisms of what the public thinks, what the public sees, what the public takes away, and ultimately the ability to get in the policies and the procedures and many, many other grants of authority that otherwise would not be there. It's described as, when we look at censorship, it's not really called, you do have some people that are not as sneaky or benign about their intentions. Certainly we've seen this, but it's oftentimes considered combating misinformation or preventing panic. We see protecting public trust is another thing. Defending democracy, as they like to call it, stopping extremism, harmful content is being reduced, or protecting vulnerable communities. There's no doubt that false information exists, but it doesn't give government the rights to be able to not let us see that. Deliberate deception exists also, and propaganda exists. Even our government does it, and they've done it quite successfully for many decades, if not centuries. But granting the government or government-aligned entities and institutions the authority, essentially, to determine political truth creates an obvious conflict. This is something that is extremely dangerous, not only just to our daily lives, but into the very realm of liberty that affects our daily lives. What we can do, the things that we say, the things that we see, or the conversations that we have with other people, just in general, and it expands from there. Information that threatens the institution may be classified as information that threatens society. And again, when you look at one of the most recent catastrophes in my mind, which was the realm of COVID, and you look at the way that they would go forth and slander other medical professionals, experts in their fields that had dissenting opinions of the mainstream Faucian propaganda and narrative, you had this situation where they said, well, you're a threat to society. You will be debarred of your medical license. You'll be kicked out of the institutions, and you will be blacklisted out of society, essentially. We see this in many, many other areas when it comes to people who talk about whether it's, Israel, the Ukraine-Russia war. If you're on the wrong side of those issues, then there's certainly great threats to people's livelihoods and the way that they're able to conduct their lives and to go about their lives and to prosper and to live in a way that I think is proper according to what the founders believed as it pertained to liberty and many others. Criticism of a policy may be treated as interference with that policy. God forbid you even have a question or you want to say, hey, I don't think that's right. You're a hazard. You're a threat to the apparatus and the established doctrine that we have. And those questions may be portrayed as dangerous. And so when we look at this, we have to also look at the language they use to label dissent and the dissenter. The dissenter ultimately becomes what the state wants it to become through a well-calculated campaign of disenfranchisement and isolation. They label people as extremists, a conspiracy theorist, an enemy sympathizer, disinformation spreader, a radical, public health threat, domestic terrorist, a danger to democracy, if you will. The label eliminates the need to answer the argument, essentially, but once the speaker has been discredited, the public is encouraged to ignore what he's saying. Don't believe this guy. He has no credibility. Well, man, I have to tell you, when it comes to Fauci and a bunch of other people, that really backfired, didn't it? Your expert was wrong and cost the lives of many, many innumerable people, or incalculable people, I should say. But have you ever noticed how many people have not come back and said, hey, we're sorry for getting you disbarred, for getting you kicked out of your accreditation in the medical field. We're sorry for treating you that way. We're sorry for the ruination and desolation it led in your life, for the loss of your home, your job, everything that you've spent your entire life building up. And you see this certainly with other positions regarding a number of other issues. You don't see that. There is no apology, because in the end of the day, these people, they don't ever want to admit that they're wrong. These people don't feel that they were wrong. They feel very convicted. And a very handful of people that do come out and say that they're wrong will still come back to a position where they'll make the same arguments again about some other issue. The progression ultimately becomes ridicule, stigma, exclusion, professional punishment, which we just talked about, financial punishment, surveillance, legal penalties, and physical enforcement. When government claims the power to protect truth, truth soon becomes whatever protects the government. This is the truth, and it insulates the government. Before authority can punish the dissenters without resistance, it must persuade the public that dissenters are unworthy of defense. They seem to isolate and ostracize your fellow American or your fellow man. We see this in increasing amounts, not just in the United States, but in Europe in particular. When you look at the different places within Germany, Britain, France, and many others, but those are very predominant areas, it's horrifying. It is horrific what has taken place. There are a number of places that I have not mentioned that have far more extreme measures to people that are dissenters. We have to look at the transition of soft persuasion to a harder form of enforcement. The soft approach typically comes from persuasion, social pressure, public shaming, algorithmic suppression, professional discipline, corporate enforcement, financial education, and the list goes on, and up to and including, in many ways, just general social interaction, right? The modern control is often spread across multiple institutions. It's not typically one isolated incident. It's not typically one thing that just so happens to affect a person in one way. Government tends to provide the policy for expectation with this. Media provides the moral narrative, so they push out whatever it is that the expectation is, and they blanket it in a form of morality or what is just or right. Technology companies regulate that form of communication when it serves their benefits and the benefits of the people that pay them. Banks and payment processors, create financial consequences. Employers and professional associations regulate participation. Schools and universities reinforce acceptable beliefs. And finally, as we get down here a little bit, which allows each institution to claim that it is acting independently. So you don't have this whole conglomeration. They're able to compartmentalize this to some degree and punish you in various areas of your life for having a different or dissenting opinion. And they can say, well, they're acting independently. We didn't tell them to do this. Even when the cumulative effect resembles centralized coercion. However, when you have the soft mechanisms that tend to fail, you start to see harder enforcements, which is mandates, fines, revoked licenses, lost employment, frozen accounts, property seizure, arrest, prosecution, imprisonment, raids, more physical force is typically applied in many ways also, further beyond what it is that I've brought up. The language of care remains, but the consequences reveal what the actual reality is. And I think that when we look at any particular issue, yes, you should listen and hear what people are saying, but you also need to measure their actions. It is for your safety or else. What is that or else part? Now, we have a bipartisan application here. Let's not kid ourselves. The right might use things like terrorism, immigration, drugs, crime, foreign enemies, and public disorder as mechanisms enabled to, or in order to, kind of push forth their policies in this ever-growing form of it's for your safety. To justify things like surveillance, policing, detention, military power, and executive authority are some of the leading areas, I would argue, that the right very much champions, specifically as it pertains to neocons. But I mean, you do see a sentiment there by and large. However, you also see the left that has their ways of using certain mechanisms. And those mechanisms tend to be misinformation, public health, firearms, climate emergencies, extremism, and economic inequality, along with racial issues and a variety of other things like the trans and LGBT issues. to justify things like censorship, mandates, confiscation, administrative authority, and economic control. The crisis differs, right? The targeted group can differ, the preferred agency differs. However, the destination is often the same thing. And one thing that I've warned about, especially as it pertains to executive power, is that it typically transfers from one administration to the other. So what you're willing to excuse today will often be carried on by the person you don't like tomorrow. And I think a lot of people just tend to lose sight on that. They, as long as their party's the one in the driver's seat, then they have nothing to worry about. But they very rarely, it seems, to actually think beyond their party and their guy. More centralized power because the public cannot be trusted to remain free, right? Each party condemns the machinery when its opponent controls and preserves the machinery, controls it and preserves the machinery when power returns to its own hands. I mean, I don't know how much more clear it is here, and I hope that's been emphasized a fair bit. Now, we have a situation, and we're getting near the end of this layout or overview, right? But there is a false choice between the idea of safety and chaos, right? Opposing centralized control does not mean that you oppose safety. Matter of fact, we have many mechanisms of safety that we as individuals can employ ourselves, that we can employ within our own communities. And the ability for us to be able to help each other is one of the greatest mechanisms that we can be safe. Allowing the individual to take stock of what is going on in their own lives, their own communities, and their immediate surroundings, I think is one of the best things, as well as combining that with forms of, optional training and the ability to encourage people to be more involved. And I think when you look at the realm to where opposing safety becomes, or opposing centralized control means opposing safety, it's a false, this is a false choice. It's a choice that sets you up to fail. The alternatives are not complete government management. Obviously, that's not what anybody wants. I mean, if you do, I mean, whatever's clever for you there, big dog, it's a method. It's not quite the best one. Or lawless chaos. I mean, you're not reduced down to these things. But very rarely do you actually see people that try to work towards anything that's actually meaningful. They have to go to the extremes of the spectrum because they seem to be the only effective or meaningful things that you can do. Well, if we don't have full management here, then we're going to have complete chaos over here. It's just not the way that things really are. There's always more to it. There's more nuance. There's a caveat here and there. A free society, however, can respond to real threats through things like constitutional limits, due process, warrants, transparency, local accountability, which I would put that above so many other things, voluntary cooperation, again, which I would say goes above so many of those other things, private association, decentralized institutions, narrowly tailored laws, genuine expiration dates, punishment for actual harm rather than anticipated disobedience. Now, I want to emphasize that, again, the community, there is a central focus here on the people in the community. We are a powerful mechanism for safety. We do not need government to run our entire lives. We don't need them to tell us what is best for us every single waking day of every single year of our lives. It doesn't, we don't need that type of invasion into our lives. It's always going to lead to the degradation of liberty, and people accept liberty. Many people accept liberty with the fact that they know that there's always an inherent danger. When you start handing over the management of that safety mechanism to the government, you actually strip away the ability of the average person to be able to create an effective mechanism to mitigate that danger in their own life. Now, again, you're always going to have wild cards. People will make bad financial decisions. They'll make really bad decisions when they're out and about and they get heated or something like that, and they might create some of the conditions for their own woes. But That's the risk we take. That is the risk of a free, liberty-oriented society. And I have to really emphasize that authorities should not have to demonstrate that a threat is real, that a measure is necessary, or should have, I'm sorry, not should not. They should have to demonstrate, I misspoke, that the threat is real. They should have to demonstrate that the measure is necessary. They should have to demonstrate that it will address specific danger. Less coercive alternatives are insufficient. That the power will end when the emergency ends. You should have to provide some type of overview and outline. And I'm not going to leave it here. I'm not going to leave it here. We also have a responsibility in ensuring that that is maintained. Everybody, there's so many people that sit here and talk about like, oh, the Constitution, Constitution doesn't enforce anything. No, I mean, if that's the argument that you're going to take as it pertains to the Constitution or laws in general, then you're missing the point of the fact, you're missing the entire point that the founders laid out, which they fundamentally understood that the Constitution doesn't enforce itself. They had the expectation that a well-educated, moral and virtuous people would be the mechanisms of enforcing the Constitution. And over the last century or 2 centuries, they have eroded the education, the morality, and the virtue of the people, and they have created a people that no longer care enough to maintain the structure of the Constitution, to be the enforcement mechanism of the Constitution. Now, the caveat here is I do think we are seeing that change. And I hope that we continue to see more people become educated, more people become moral and virtuous and just in the ways that they go about things. We need this change in society. It has to be a societal change, and it's not one that's going to change overnight. But we are an important mechanism in making sure that these things are done correctly, that they abide by liberty, and they are not usurping, and that they are not tyrannical, and that they are not despotic, and that we don't continue down this road into a dystopia. Instead, however, moving forward, the burden is often reversed, right? The citizen must explain why he needs privacy. Why do you need privacy? Why do you need a lock on your phone? Why do you need a lock on your door? What do you mean you lock your car? Why don't you want to be looked at by a flock camera? Why don't you want to be surveilled? Why don't you submit yourself to a search? What do you mean you don't want to be unjustly have your house unjustly looked through? What do you mean you want us to come back with a warrant? Why do you need a firearm? Only, like they'll frame it as something as simple as like, well, only people up to no good are going to need a firearm, right? How many times have we seen that? And we see that even down to things like knives. Well, why do you need a knife? Why do you need this? Why do you need that? You see, the realm is they continue to force you to justify these things. Why do you refuse a medical procedure, right? Why aren't you taking the vaccination? Why? Are you a dissenter? Do you not care about your grandmother? Do you not care about your children? Do you not care about your wife or the community at large? How dare you? Why don't you need this? Why is it that you want to conduct a private transaction out of the public view? Why is it that the government shouldn't be involved in this transaction? You're obviously up to no good. Why do you want to speak without permission? Why are you going to interject your voice when you're not provided permission? How dare you? You're stepping out of line. Why is it that you distrust the institution despite the fact that we are forcing you to justify basically your existence? Why is it that you're not obedient in falling in line? See, the thing is in a free society, a government must justify every intrusion. A society that values liberty, the government is held to account. And when they don't justify it, when they don't answer for it, the people are meant to be the mechanism, as I said before, to hold them to account. The citizen should never have to justify their liberty. We should not have to answer to the government as to why we want to build a pond on our property, why we want to catch rain, why we need a light machine gun for protection, why I want an Abrams tank, why I feel that I just want to do a private transaction between me and my neighbor, why it is that I want my communication to be secure, why I don't want you to have a camera facing inside my house. I don't owe you an explanation for that. Nobody does. Nobody has to answer for their own liberty. Why should we justify our own existence? Does that seem like a free society to you? Does it seem like that is a society that fundamentally embraces liberty and the principles that our founding fathers fought for? And it's not just about them. There's other societies in history that have fundamentally understood these principles too. But one has to ask the question, does a truly free society ask permission for their liberties, for their freedom, for their own existence? Do we justify ourselves to those people who ask and demand for our obedience and for us to justify our own existence? Now, moving forward, when we look at liberty, responsibility, and human dignity, because all of these things are important, liberty includes risk. People will make poor decisions. They always have. There's always an inherent risk. They'll express offensive opinions. They'll spend money unwisely. I'm sure we've all done that at some point. They will take physical and economic risks in the jobs that we go to, the things that we do, the investments we make. They will associate with unpopular people, which we've every right to, the freedom of association, the right to associate, and will fail. These are all things that we as humans do. It doesn't make us bad. It doesn't make us incapable. That's how we learn. That's how we pick ourselves up. That's how we adapt. That's how we become better. A society that attempts to prevent every single mistake must eventually eliminate meaningful choice. And then what are you left with? I would argue you're left with a society that eventually will go extinct anyways, or will fall apart in mutiny. Freedom without the possibility of choosing wrongly, or liberty for that matter, is not liberty or freedom. Liberty must be paid with responsibility. We are responsible for the things that we do, for the things we say, for all of these things. It is the burden that we carry as a society who strives to be more liberty-driven. And they don't always have to be like injurious things. They just could be misfortune, a bad allocation of something, whatever the case is. But we burden that responsibility as individuals, right? A free society holds people accountable for actual harm. A liberty-oriented society, while resisting the temptation to manage them before they have violated anyone's rights. That is not a just society when you're preempting. We have laws because the laws are carried out. Like, you don't murder people. That's a moral imperative, right? Murder is wrong. But when murder happens and it's a tragedy, we have laws and we send those people to jail, or we should. Again, if you're a just society, one would expect that society is also moral, virtuous, and well-educated. I have argued previously that we have lost much of that. Therefore, our societal direction and our sense of actual justice is diminished severely, to the destruction of our own society, quite frankly. And I think that there is a light where people are coming back around to moral life, virtue, and becoming more educated. And I think that's important. If we are going to save any form of our society, not necessarily just salvaging the republic, but just society, saving the heart of society and the individual. It destroys the individual. So there is a philosophical thing here where the authoritarian asks, or the despot, the tyrant in general, how can we prevent people from making dangerous choices? But a truly just, liberty-oriented, and a free society would ask in turn, how can we preserve the individual choice while holding people accountable when they violate the rights of others? There's a stark contrast there. And we as a people, not just in the United States, but people all over the world, ought to be asking themselves which they want to be. There's also a deeper moral and more spiritual issue, if you will. The person is not merely just simply a body to be protected, a worker to be managed, a consumer to be tracked, or a statistic to be optimized. Human beings possess reason, conscience, responsibility, and moral agency. We possess virtue and a compass to hopefully guide us in the right direction. Physical survival is important, but survival without liberty does not constitute full human flourishing. Therefore, where you have no liberty, you don't see the full potential of the society. And when you don't see the full potential of society, therefore, you do not see the prosperity of that society. A society that protects the body while extinguishing conscience has not protected the whole person. So I want to kind of end on this. Safety does matter, right? People ought to be safe. There is always going to be some expectation of safety, security, prosperity, a sense of public order, perhaps. But safety is not an unlimited political claim. Once safety is treated as absolute, every right becomes conditional. When it becomes the cudgel and the excuse and the mechanism for usurpation and a dystopian-like society of control and consolidation, it becomes antithetical to liberty. Every conversation, when you get this situation where safety is treated as absolute and every right becomes conditional, every conversation can be monitored, every purchase will be tracked, every association will be investigated, every profession can be regulated, every movement restricted, every opinion can be classified, every dissenter can be declared dangerous, and every intrusion can be justified with the same reassuring phrase: that is all for your safety. The question is not whether those in power claim good intentions. The question is whether there are boundaries they are forbidden to cross, and whether we as the people are going to be the mechanism that says no, no more. Again, the Constitution and our founding documents do not enforce themselves. We are the most effectual mechanism when we are educated, moral, and virtuous people. We can defend liberty as we ought. Whenever officials demand new authority, citizens must ask, or individuals, whichever you prefer. I prefer the word individual, but I digress. Did they create or worsen a crisis? Are they solving the problem or preserving it? What power are they attempting to gain? Who will inherit that power? What happens to those who refuse? When does the authority expire? would we trust our political enemies with it? I think these are important questions that we have to ask. The answer to danger is not recklessness or indifference. It is a form of restraint, decentralization, transparency, proper justice, like real due process type of justice, personal responsibility, self-determination, strong communities, and the courage to defend the liberty of the people with whom we disagree. When you have authority that tells us one more right must be surrendered, one more conversation monitored, one more choice regulated, and one more dissenter silenced, we have to ask, is this genuine protection? Or has protection become the language through which the control is made acceptable by the state? Safety may preserve life for a time, but liberty makes that life our own. In the end of the day, we have a choice. And that choice rests solely upon our shoulders. There is no parchment, no document, no anything that will ever enforce itself and do the things that we as individuals must do. This is extremely important for us to remember in every day of our life, when we have families, when we live in communities, when we want to see something better come about. We are the mechanism that is the bulwark against tyranny, despots, and those who would seek to control and centralize power over us and determine every facet of our life, every facet of our existence. So the final question that I pose to you before closing is simply along the lines of this. Is it really for your safety? Or is it to deprive you and take your liberty and control your life? With that being said, thank you very much for coming out and watching the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I greatly appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe, and let me know in the comments whether or not you got something out of this episode. And I'd love to hear what your guys and gals' thoughts are. I will do the very best that I can to respond to each of your comments as they come through the pike. And hopefully we can have some good conversations, perhaps maybe some debates about this conversation and topic. Like I said, I'm having Tom Edlam, wonderful economist, back on next Saturday at 5 p.m. Central. That is 6 p.m. Eastern time. And September 17th, I will be having Scott Horton back on at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. So thank you, each and every one of you, and we will see you all down the road at the next episode. Go with liberty, stay adaptable, stay dangerous, right? Be capable. Support your families and your communities, and we'll see you on the next one.